in many fields, and he's very much into astronomy. He's very much into the feast. He's Jewish, but most of all, he's my friend. Would you welcome Mark Biltz?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You can be seated. Let's make sure everything is working. I just really appreciate the Church of His Presence. I really appreciate Pastor John and Brenda and everything that you guys do and having me come out again. I'm very excited about this message today because, as he's saying, the feast of the Lord is so important. And one of the problems is the English language. Because like in Genesis 1:14, it talks about how God created the sun and the moon for signs and seasons. And when we hear the word seasons, we think of winter, spring, summer, fall. But in Leviticus 23, where it talks about the feast of the Lord, when we think of feast, we think of food. But did you know the Hebrew word that's translated as seasons is the same Hebrew word that's now translated as feasts? Same Hebrew word. So what does the Hebrew word moed mean? Fall or food? And the problem is, in the English, they're both wrong. Neither one is the correct translation. How many of you believe in divine appointments? That's what the word means. God created the sun. First off, you may be surprised. It doesn't say he created it for heat. In Genesis 1:14, the very first thing God said he created the sun and the moon and the stars were for signs. That's what it says. And then when it says seasons, days, and years, it's not talking about 1948. It's not talking, about Monday or Tuesday. He's talking about the biblical calendar, the Jubilee years, the Shemitah years, the feast days. And so God literally created the sun and the moon and the stars to determine when the divine appointments will be, when he will intersect human history. Oh, that's good. That's what these are for. They were also called holy convocations. And in Hebrew, the word for convocation we know means an assembly, but it's more than that. It's mikra, and it means a dress rehearsal. A dress rehearsal. And so what happens, Passover, for example, was the dress rehearsal. So every year for 1,500 years, they killed the Passover lamb on Passover because he was going to die on Passover. He was buried on unleavened bread. He rose on the Feast of First Fruits. The Spirit in Acts was poured out on the Feast of Pentecost. It wasn't 6 months earlier or later. And if you remember, Peter said, these guys aren't drunk. It's the third hour of the day. That's 9 in the morning, time of the morning sacrifice. And so everything is tied not only to the day, but to the very hour. And so that's what I love to talk about. Even, in Revelation, it says Jesus is basically the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. That means God had his death pre-planned out at creation. Did you know he had King David 1,000 years before he came write the funeral hymns that would be sung at his funeral? Now that's a father who loves his son. He says, I'm going to determine what day my son's going to die. I'm going to determine what time he's going to die. I'm going to determine what songs are sung at his funeral. And so, anyway, so in my teachings, I go through how he fulfilled all the spring feasts, not only to the day, but to the very hour of his first coming. Now, how many of you believe he's the same yesterday, today, and forever? I mean, do you think that, or do you really believe it? If he fulfilled the spring feast to the very day of his first coming, he'll fulfill the fall feast to the very day of his second coming. And so how many believe that we're told to be watching? Are we going to be asleep or watching? The Laodicean church is the sleeping church. Is Church of His Presence a sleeping church or a wide awake church? How awake? Oh, that's better. We want to be awake. And the neat thing is these appointments tell us when to be watching. When to be watching. So is my PowerPoint up? Go ahead and put up my first PowerPoint so everybody can see it. I see it on the back screen, but I don't see it on this screen. There! Do you have a presentation mode? So they don't see the next one, it just shows the current one? Oh well, that's okay. All right, how many of you know in Ecclesiastes 3, verse 1 through 8, it says, for everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. For how many things? Everything? Every single thing. Now, I'm going to read this because I want to emphasize something, and God's word really has emphasis. I use a lot of scriptures, and I'll just mention this as well, especially for all those live streaming all over the world. I sent my notes to Church of His Presence, so it's on their website. So maybe if you have an iPhone, you can follow along with me. But I really believe people don't care what I have to say. They want to know what God has to say. And so I use scripture after scripture after scripture to back up everything. So you're going to get flooded with scripture verses. But listen to this. It says, for everything, there's a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. It says there's a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up that which is planted. I want to stop there for a minute. One of the biggest problems many churches have, they're planting at plucking time and plucking at planting time. You need to know what time it is. It says a time to kill, to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance. There's a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones, a time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek, a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to cast away, a time to tear, a time to sow, a time to keep silent, and a time to speak, a time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, a time for peace. And my question is, what time is it? Does anybody here know what time it is? When I don't remember if it was first grade or second grade, but they taught us how to tell time. I'm going to tell you how to tell time biblically, so you know what time it is. So where are we at concerning the time for the redemption? Okay, well, one of the things is, do we know how to tell time according to God's calendar? Or in other words, God's day timer?
Sorry, they said unplug.
Yeah, because it's supposed to be reversed.
Yeah, they said to put it in presentation mode.
That's what I do.
Okay, try it again.
Okay. See, that's presentation mode. But now if I plug it in, let's see if that's what happens. Hopefully it does.
There you go.
Well, no, it kicked off. Let's see. You can see his presenter view, but it's reversed. I have it in presenter view, but for some reason it's communicating backwards to you guys. And if you could fix it, that would be good. Okay, so now the question is what time is it? Did you know from Adam to Abraham, it was 1948 years? And from Messiah to Israel, becoming a nation, was 1948 years. I find that very fascinating. But concerning for everything, he says, there's a purpose. Listen to Romans 9:17. It says, the scripture says to Pharaoh, for this very purpose I cause you to be raised up. God has a purpose for everything in our lives. Listen to Exodus 23. This is verses 14 through 16. Here's where God says that they're to observe a feast to him 3 times a year. And he mentioned these 3 feasts. One of them is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or Passover. It's a week long. 7 days you're to eat unleavened bread. And then it says it's supposed to be in the month of Aviv. It's known now as Nisan, which basically means spring. And then he says the Feast of Harvest, which refers to Pentecost. The first fruits of your labors, which you sow in the field. And then it says, and the Feast of Harvest, which is at the end of the year. Now, when it says the end of the year here, it's not talking about December, January, because that's our calendar. You see, the world goes by a solar calendar that Rome invented, Julius Caesar, that Pope Gregory, tweaked a little bit, adding leap years, making it the Gregorian calendar. The Muslims go by the moon only. Okay, that's the Islamic calendar. That's why Ramadan, their festival, will be in December some years, in June other years. It floats. But in Genesis 1:14, God says, look, the calendar that I'm using, that I want you to use, is used by both the sun and the moon. That is why we add 1 day every 4 years. But on the biblical calendar, they add an entire month, 7 times over 19 years. The reason for that is Passover has to be kept in the spring. You can't keep Passover in December. Okay, so that's why the biblical calendar, God says, I want the sun and the moon is the one that I use. Now let me ask you something. How many of you, if you're working and your boss tells you he wants to meet you at 5 o'clock on Friday, what would happen if you tell him that doesn't work in my schedule? How about 2 o'clock on Tuesday? Are you going to be going to work on Monday? Okay. Well, this is God's day timer. And he says, look, I'm going to schedule when I'm going to meet with you. So you realize divine appointments are scheduled. They're not, divine appointments are great randomly. But to also know God has scheduled divine appointments. How many of you want to be at the coronation of the Messiah? Okay. How many of you want to be at the wedding of the Messiah? Then don't you think it'd be a good idea to be at the dress rehearsal? Okay, that's what these feasts are. Every single year, it's the dress rehearsal for what's coming. So like on Rosh Hashanah, every year, you know at a baseball game or a football game, they do the wave all the way around the thing, okay? I thought, you know what I want to do? I want to do a shofar wave in every time zone around the world on Rosh Hashanah, proclaiming God as King. And so for the last several years, we've had people in every time zone around the world blowing shofars, announcing when it became Rosh Hashanah in their time zone. And it's just this enormous wave of shofar blasts. Then when it hits Jerusalem, everyone from all the nations blasts at the same time when it hits Jerusalem. And then it keeps going around. And so we have a sign up on our website, I believe, for churches, individuals, home fellowships that want to participate in the worldwide shofar blast, honoring God as King that takes place. So for me, it's always want to be at a dress rehearsal. But here's the other thing. In Exodus 23, it kept talking about the harvest, which is at Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles in the fall. Listen to Matthew chapter 13. This is verse 29 and 30. It says, but he said, nay, while you gather up the tares. Remember the story of the wheat and the tares? He says, I don't want you to root up the wheat with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. Okay? And then there's a time to harvest and a time to plant. And he says, in the time of harvest, I'll tell the reapers, gather together first the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them, and then gather the wheat and place them into my barn. Anybody know where God's barn is? His barn is the Temple Mount, because it was the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. Okay, but let's go on. Let's look at, again, Matthew 13, 39 and 40. He's talking about this parable of the wheat and the tares, and he says the harvest is the end of the world. Okay? The reapers are the angels. Therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so will it be at the end of the world. Okay, well now let's go to Revelation chapter 14, verse 18. It says there's another angel that came out of the altar who has the power over fire, and he called with a great voice to him who had the sharp sickle. And he says, send forth your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for the earth's grapes are fully ripe. So what is that telling us? At the first coming, he came during Passover, which is the barley harvest. Okay? And then what happens at Pentecost, that is the wheat harvest, when you understand Israel's agricultural cycle. In Revelation, they're not talking about barley and wheat. They're talking about what? Grapes. Because in the fall, at the fall feast, is the grape harvest. Because that's when it's going to take place. You get this? I want to make sure you connect the dots. As a little kid, you have the 100 little numbers, 1 through 100, and you connect the little dots, and then you see a picture. You don't know what was going to be there. I'm not creative. All I do is connect dots. And then when you see the dot, you see the picture. I don't like to force puzzle pieces. I believe when it's God, it just falls in place. I tell people, if you get hit by a truck, you know you got hit by a truck. Well, it's the same thing. When you hear truth, you're going to know it's truth. It just rings true. Okay, so let's look at Acts chapter 2, 41. Everyone's familiar with Shavuot, Pentecost. It says, then they that gladly received his word were baptized, and the same day they were added to them about 3,000 souls. Why? That's the wheat harvest. Pentecost is the wheat harvest. So you get a harvest of people at the same time as the harvest. This is the connection. Listen to Hosea 6:3. It says, then we will know if we follow on to know the Lord, his going forth is prepared as the morning. Now listen, he will come to us as the rain, as the latter rain and the former rain to the earth. Well, so when does it rain? We got to know Israel's agricultural calendar. And we're going to find out he's coming as the rains. And notice it mentioned the latter rain first, and then the former rain. A lot of people are praying for the latter rain. You don't want the latter rain now. You want the former rain. The reason why we get confused is because we don't know the biblical calendar, so I'm going to explain that to you. But no, he says he's going to come as the rain. Now listen to Deuteronomy 11, verse 13 and 14. It says, it'll come to pass if you listen diligently to my commandments, which I command you, to love the Lord your God, to serve him with all your heart, with all your soul. He says, then I will give you the rain in its due season. There's a season and a time for everything. You get the rain in his due season, and then it says the first rain and the latter rain, that you can gather in your grain, your wine, and your oil. Okay, so we're talking about rain here, but do you know, this is the problem with the English language. In Hebrew, I heard that one time in Alaska, they have 100 words for snow. There's all different kinds of snow. Well, in Hebrew, there are several words for rain, but in English, when you read this, all you see is rain, rain, rain. So I'm going to go over the difference because I really want you more than anything else to get on God's calendar, to understand his times, his seasons, so you know when to be watching. Okay, the first time, the word rain is matar, and that's just rain. But then it talks about the first rain is yoreh, which is followed by the latter rain, malkosh. Okay, so listen to this. In Joel chapter 2, verse 23, it says, be glad, you children of Zion, and rejoice in the Lord your God. He has given you the former rain moderately, and he will cause to come down for you the rain, the former rain and the latter rain in the first month. Does anybody know when the first month is on the biblical calendar? When is the first month? And look, this is a double portion. You're going to get a double portion. You're not only going to get the former rain and the latter rain, you're getting them together in the first month. So here's the biblical calendar here. Now I have Tishri up at the top because this is the agricultural calendar. Let me get my little laser pointer here. See if it works. Oh, wow, you guys really got to reverse this screen somehow. But anyway, because I'd love for you guys to see this, but right here is Tishri, which is when the fall feasts are. This is when, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Yom Teruah all take place. And so this is like September, October. This is the first month of the year. And so if you go, it's, you have your autumn, and then here comes winter, and then spring, and then summer. All right? So that's how it goes. Now, Nisan is the first month of the religious calendar. Okay, so when you're reading in Genesis where it talks about the first month or the second month, that's based on the agricultural calendar before the Torah was given to Moses and he had to change it. And then God says, okay, now I want Nisan to be the first month. Okay? So when I talk about the first month, if I'm talking about the agricultural calendar, creation, I'm talking about Tishri 1 being the first month. If I'm talking about the religious calendar, then Nisan 1 is the first month. Okay? I know that can be confusing, but I just want you to understand how that falls. Now, Heshvan is something I'll be talking about, which is right in here where I have it raining. Did you know that's when the flood rains fell? Noah's flood. It fell in Heshvan. And so the barley crop is in the spring, and then the Pentecost, the wheat harvest, is also in the spring going into summer, and then the grape harvest is in the fall. And so because Revelation talks about fulfilling the fall feast, it's going to be in the fall in the month of Tishri. Now, to give you an example, the timing, I'm going to tell you about the timing of historical revivals. All right? How many of you ever heard of Azusa Street? Does anybody know when that started? The day. The very day was April 9th of 1906. Guess what day April 9th was in 1906? Okay. Let me go over here. Heshvan. Well, before I do that, the Azusa Street Revival, April 19th, was the 14th of Nisan, Passover. So think about this. Wow, on Passover, that's when the Azusa Street Revival takes place. And in talking to the pastor, he was saying that the Brownsville Revival started on Father's Day in June. That's right around the Feast of Pentecost. Okay? But I want to talk mostly about Heshvan. Listen to this, which is September, October. That's when at the fall feast they're praying for the fall rains, because if they don't get the fall rains, they don't have a crop. Did you know it was on October 31st of 1517, exactly 500 years from 1917, that Martin Luther nailed the whole Reformation and the 95 Theses on the door? That was in the month of Heshvan, and that was 500 years ago. Jonathan Edwards, his revival began spreading all over England in Heshvan. In October of 1735, John and Charles Wesley were going. They landed in America. In October of 1740, George Whitefield preached for Jonathan Edwards to over 20,000 people. Lasted for over 18 months. October 31st, 1825, we have George Whitefield. We have George Mueller in 1825. In 1830, it was in Heshvan that Charles Finney started his revivals. It was in 1871, it was in Heshvan that D.L. Moody led his powerful campaigns. And October 24th of 1949, Billy Graham leads his campaign. So do you get the idea? Okay, God has a season for everything, and you're going to see the rains, let the rain fall from heaven, is going to be happening on God's calendar. That's why they happen during the fall feast, the spring feast, Pentecost. So I want you to be thinking about the importance of being on God's calendar. Many of you are familiar with 1 Chronicles 12:32, where it says of the children of Issachar, they were people who had the understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. So how many of you want to understand the times that you're living in so you know what you ought to do? Okay, so the big question is, what time is it? Now, look at Haggai chapter 1, verse 1 through 4. It says it was in the second year of Darius the king. You going to be able to switch it? I sure hope. Oh, which way? Here's to get out if you want to get out.
I need to get back in it.
Okay.
I've got to see up.
Okay, sure. Well, we'll just hit presenter view is what I hit, but it shows up there.
See, there's the very top.
See, if you push, see, that is my next slide where it says first day of the 6th month. See, I'm supposed to be seeing what they're seeing, and they're supposed to see what I'm seeing, or vice versa. Hey, while they're doing that, I'll tell you a story. I love this song that we sang about no need to fear. And I'm going to tell you why. I am not afraid to die at all because I have almost died a dozen times. I've had guns at my head twice. Just me and the gunman, no one else. They both said they're going to blow my head off, and I am still here. Major car accidents. You ever think? You get it. Okay, well, now I got to finish my story. I'll make it real quick. I'm in a retail store. I'm managing a shoe store. I'm by myself. It's like a Payless shoe store, volume shoe store. It's in the middle of a strip center with a Kmart, Chinese restaurant, all that stuff. And I'm in it's a long, narrow store. It's not a wide store like this. It's long and narrow. And I'm in the very back on the phone with my boss. And I hear the door dings. I knew someone came in, but I'm on the phone with the boss, and it's self-service. You know, they can look for themselves. Well, the next thing I know, this person walked the whole perimeter of the store. They have this pantyhose, black pantyhose over their face, and they put the gun right at my head. Get off the phone! And I go to my boss, Larry, I gotta go. You know, he goes, Mark, are you being robbed? And I look at the guy, and he said, I said, get off the phone. I go, goodbye, Larry. You know, and I hang up. He tries to call back, and the guy says, don't answer that. And I said, I ain't going to answer it. Let's go up to the front. So we get all the way up to the front of the store where the cash register is. Now remember, all these stores have big glass windows so everyone can see in. The cash register is always by the front door. I get behind the counter and I go like this. He goes, get your hands down, stupid. People can see you. And I've never been robbed before. What do you want? And he puts a money bag on the counter, and I put the money from the register in it, and then he throws another bag on the floor behind me, and that's where the floor safe is. So I kneel down, and I'm getting the money out of the floor safe, but instead of handing it over across the counter to him, I hand it over by the door. I want him to grab the money and leave. Okay? Hint, hint, over here. He comes around and grabs the money, goes behind me, puts the gun in my head, and says, now we're going to the back room. Oh, this is not a good sign. You know, and my mind is going fight or flight. Do I stay up front where people can see me? What do I do? And off we go to the back room. We get to the back room, and he goes, all right, lay down, face on the floor. And, lie down, face on the floor. And I'm thinking, a bullet in the back of the head, correct, And I'd only been saved a couple of years. I mean, as far as I knew, Hebrews was in the Old Testament. I mean, I didn't know. But, I read a lot of the Bible. And I really believe, even if you don't understand, if you get it in, God can pull it out when you need it. Okay? And so what happens, right as I'm getting ready to lie down, my mind is racing. God puts a Bible verse in my mind that I didn't even know was a Bible verse, but I had read it. It's Proverbs 3, around 22 through 25. Right when he said, lie down, face on the floor, out of nowhere comes this Bible verse. When you lie down, you will not be afraid when sudden fear comes upon you. That's Proverbs 3. I didn't even know that it was Proverbs 3 or where it was. And it was a few weeks later, I'm reading Proverbs again, and there's a verse that God had put into my mind. And so I knew it was going to be okay. And so he said, don't try nothing funny. And he turns and he runs out the door, But anyway, like I said, I've almost died so many times, I feel like there's no reason to fear. If it's not your time, it's not going to happen. God, it says he has given all of us. He's counted our days. Well, if he's counted my days, why should I worry? He's in charge. He's not going to have me die before my time. So in Malachi, it talks about in the last days, we're going to tread on the wicked. We're going to be ashes under our feet. And we're reaching that time where, like Joshua and Caleb, we're to have no fear. Sure, there's a lot of giants, but that's so you can stomp on them. Okay, so listen to Haggai 1 through 4. It says, in the second year of Darius the king, it was in the 6th month, in the first day of the month, the word of the Lord came by Haggai. Okay, when is the first day of the 6th month? What is he talking about? The first day of the 6th month is the time of this eclipse coming. It's the first of Elul. Tishri, which is when the fall feasts are, is the 7th month. So I want you to realize it was on the first of Elul, the first day of the 6th month, because for them it's always on the new moon, okay, which is when it is, first of Elul. And listen to what it says. It says here that this is what the Lord of hosts says. Now, who's he speaking to? His people. And he said, these people are saying that the time has not come, the time for the Lord's house to be built. And then the word of the Lord came by Haggai and the prophet saying, is it time for you to dwell in your paneled houses and this house lie waste? So what do we find? On the first of Elul is when God speaks to his people and telling them they don't know what time it is. And so here, at the first of Elul, God, who says in Genesis 1:14, he's using the sun and the moon as signs. I believe God is telling the church we need to know what time it is. Now, the other thing, when is the shofar blown? All right? It is blown, look at Psalm 81, 3 through 4. It says, blow the shofar at the new moon. So at the first of every month, they would blow the shofar, okay? But guess what happens in the month of Elul? In the month of Elul, they blow the shofar every day, leading up to the Feast of Trumpets, okay? What is the purpose of the shofar? In Hebrew, the word also can be translated as alarm. It's the alarm clock to wake the sleeping church. Okay, so starting with this solar eclipse, right at the first of Elul, I encourage you guys, if you have a shofar, blow it. Let people know it's time to wake up. And they do it every day because then comes the fall feast, the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Kippur, the Day of Judgment. Within Judaism, Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the heavenly court. Court is in session. The books are open. God looks at everybody, decides who's going to live the next year, who's going to die the next year, and then on Yom Kippur, judgment is sent, the books are closed, and then that following year, the judgment is meted out as God thinks he should. So in Joel 2, listen to verse 1. It says, blow the shofar in Zion, sound an alarm, that's the same word, okay, in my holy mountain. Then it says, let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord comes, and it is close at hand. If it was close at hand in Joel, how does it say close do you think it is now? Okay, so in Elul 1, the shofar is blown every day. Once we've entered the Hebrew month of Elul, we know that the high holiday season is just around the corner. How many of you ever had to go to court? How many of you know if you go to court, you better be prepared? So the month of Elul is preparing for court, the court of heaven. That's what we're getting ready for, all right? And it's also, the month of Elul, they say, is when the king is in the field. The month of Elul. It's like he comes down and he asks every individual, will you crown me as king on Rosh Hashanah? Rosh Hashanah is the crowning of the king. This is when we say we crown you king on the Feast of Trumpets. On Rosh Hashanah, we crown. Did you know that is the very day Adam opened his eyes for the very first time and saw the glory of God in the heavens? So Rosh Hashanah is known as the birthday of the world. This is when man was created. Okay, and so it's for all of the world to crown God as king. Now, the same thing. This is like the wedding of the Messiah. The king is wooing his bride out in the wilderness. Now, concerning Elul 1, understand this. Did you know Elul 1 is the very day Moses ascended the mount for 40 days, coming down on Yom Kippur, trying to make atonement for the sin of the golden calf? Elul 1 is the very day Jonah began his 40 days of Nineveh, telling them to repent. That's why the month of Elul is known as the month of repentance. And that is why John the Baptist, it was on Elul 1 that Jesus was immersed and went into the wilderness for 40 days. But see, if you don't know God's calendar and you don't put these things together, all of a sudden, when you do, you see this pattern of how important Elul 1 is, especially now, when we also have a total solar eclipse, and God said he created the signs in the heavens, or the sun, the moon, the stars for signs. But the fact that it's happening at the first of Elul, and when we understand the other events that happen in the Bible, we know how important this is. Okay, Matthew 24. How many of you are familiar with Matthew 24? Okay. Listen to this. It says, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him and said, okay, tell us when these things are going to happen. What is the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And Yeshua said, well, be careful that no one leads you astray. Many are going to come and say, I'm the Messiah, and lead many astray. And then he says this, you will hear of wars and rumors of war, but don't be troubled. This has to happen. The end isn't yet. And then he says, the nation will rise against nation. And just so you know, that's the wrong translation. It's ethnic group will rise against ethnic group. And so we can see that even within the United States, the ethnic groups fighting against the ethnic groups. There will be famines, plagues, earthquakes, various places, but all these things are the beginning of the birth pains. Okay, now, put on your Jewish hat for a minute, and you're one of the disciples in Jesus' day, and he tells you there's going to be wars. What two major wars are you going to think of? If you were lived in the time of Yeshua, Jesus, and he was telling you there's going to be these wars, there are two main wars the Jews always think of. I'll tell you what they are. Number one is the Babylonian, when the temple was destroyed. Okay, the temple was destroyed on the 9th of Av. How many of you have heard of the 9th of Av before? Who has never heard of the 9th of Av? Anybody who's never heard of the 9th of Av? 9th of Av is the very day the 10 spies brought the bad report and Joshua and Caleb brought the good report. So that day became cursed throughout Jewish history. So on the 9th of Av, that's when the temple was destroyed. In 70 AD, it was also destroyed on the 9th of Av. Same day. Both times, temples were destroyed on the very same day. 1290, all the Jews were kicked out of England on the 9th of Av. 1492, all the Jews were kicked out of Spain on the 9th of Av. World War I started on the 9th of Av. Hitler's proclamation to kill the Jews was on the 9th of Av. Okay, when you're on God's calendar and you see historical events and you tie it to it, you see that. But the other big war they always think of is the Maccabee War and Hanukkah. Okay, so we have the 9th of Av, and then we have Kislev 25 through Tevet 2. So when they think, Matthew 24 actually is Hanukkah happening again. When you know the story of Hanukkah, you read Matthew 24, the disciples then were saying, oh my goodness, Hanukkah is going to happen again. So if we want to understand what's coming, we have to understand Hanukkah. And like I said, it was on the 9th of Av that the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. Now, think about this for a minute. How do we know how important it is when we look at historical events, can we tie into the biblical calendar? Now we know God is in it. How many of you know that World War I started August 1st of 1914? We always think 1917 because that's when the U.S. jumped into the war. But World War I started on August 1st, 1914, and as I said, it was on the 9th of Av. Okay, but get a load of this. We got involved on April 6th of 1917. That's when we got involved in the war. That's Nisan 14. That was Passover. The United States gets involved at Passover. As a matter of fact, the United States became a nation on July 4, 1776. That was the 17th of Tammuz, the same day they worshipped the golden calf. And look at the big golden calf on Wall Street. Okay, so they're thinking, when the Jews are thinking wars, they're thinking the 9th of Av. See, this is the difference. If you have a Jewish mindset only and you don't understand the Christian mindset, you don't read Matthew 24. You don't know there's that connection. Well, guess what? If you're a Christian with just a Christian mindset, not a Jewish mindset, you're going to see these events happen, but you're not going to connect it to that's what he was talking about. December 11th, 1917 is when George Allenby came into Jerusalem. Well, guess what? That was Hanukkah. So in the Bible, he's telling them there'll be wars. What happens to the one who has both the Christian and the Jewish perspective? They see, wow, World War I started on the 9th of Av, and it ended around Hanukkah. Wow, the First World War was a signal. You following me? Very important historical signal. Okay, and then Matthew 24:9, it says they're going to deliver you up to oppression, and they're going to kill you, and you're going to be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Well, that's World War II. That's what happened to all the Jews. They were hated by all the nations. Look at Matthew 24:15 through 20. It goes on and says, when you see the abomination of desolation that was spoken through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, it says, let the reader understand. Well, do you know that had already happened once? That was the story of Hanukkah. Again, so in other words, what we need to realize is history repeats itself. If you have a Greek mindset, you go, that was fulfilled, checklist, done, over. No. If it's happened before, that means it will happen again from a different viewpoint. Okay. And so judgment is coming on Hanukkah. Let's go to Matthew 24 again. Look at 31, 34, because it's all about end times. So as I go through this, I want you to see how these end times events are tied to the biblical calendar. It says he's going to send out his angels with a great sound of a shofar. And when is the shofar sounded? The new moon and Rosh Hashanah. Okay, that's the time and a purpose. So that's when these events could happen. He says, learn from the fig tree this parable. Okay, who's the fig tree? The fig tree is Israel. That is exactly right. Okay, and he says, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors. And then he says, most certainly I tell you, this generation will not pass away till everything is accomplished. Well, the question now comes, first off, we know we're going to hear the sound of a shofar. We know who the fig tree is, but how long is a generation? And when did the generation begin? Is a generation 50 years, 70 years, 100 years, 120 years? Well, wait till you see what I'm about to show you. But first, let's go to Isaiah 66, 7 and 8. Thinking of the wonder in heaven, the birth of the man-child. We already talked about that just a little bit. But listen to Isaiah 66, 7 and 8. It says, before she travailed, she brought forth. Before her pain came, she delivered a son. Who's ever heard of such a thing? Who's seen such things? So a lamb be born in a day? Well, who's that referring to? Israel being born in a day, 1947, 1948, you're going to see this is very significant. And so we talked about the two wars that the Jewish mind is going to think of, the Babylonian War and the Maccabean War in Hanukkah. But now we also read about judgment coming. Okay, if you're in the Jewish mindset 2,000 years ago, what are the two big judgment events that come to your mind from reading the Bible? Okay, you're going to have Noah's flood, and you're going to have Sodom and Gomorrah, right? These are the two big judgment events. And what did Jesus say? As it was in the days of Noah and as it was in the days of Lot. Okay, so now we see a connection not only to wars, but now we're going to look at the connection between Noah's flood and Lot. Noah's flood happened during Heshvan on the 17th. And remember, Heshvan is the month of what? Rains. And that when it rained. Did you know Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed during Passover week? That's when Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. Okay, Luke 17, 26 through 30, as it happened in the days of Noah. So it will be in the Son of Man. And it says, as in the days of Lot, but that's the reference. Okay, now, Genesis 1:14 again. God said, let there be lights, and let them be for signs, seasons, days, and years. Look at these eclipses. Did you know this series of eclipses happened during the time of the Messiah? You go back, NASA's website confirms it. All of these eclipses were happening the very year and the next year when Messiah died. And what do we see? Israel becomes a nation, and you have 4 blood moons on Passover and Tabernacles. Passover and Tabernacles. 1967, you have again the blood moons, Passover and Tabernacles, Passover and Tabernacles. So the question is, are you on God's calendar? This is what I was talking about when I was here the last time, a couple years ago, 2014, 2015. I never said anything would happen on those dates. I said these are signs of something big coming, especially 2017, 2018, where you're celebrating the Jubilee of Jerusalem becoming a nation or getting recaptured, and then 48 as Israel becoming a nation. So Genesis 1:14, God said he created them for signs. What does Luke 21, 5 and 26 say? Jesus says, there will be signs in the sun, in the moon, in the stars. Okay, so wow. I mean, of course, that's what he created them for. And it talks about how the powers of heavens will be shaken. And then he says, when these things begin to happen, what are you supposed to do? What are you looking at? The signs, the sun, the moon, and the stars. Okay, because your redemption is near. So we see the generation that won't pass away is a generation that has to do with Israel. And that generation ends with the signs in the heavens. These are our markers. All right? Now, again, in Luke 21, 31, 32, he says, whoever sees these things happening, now he's speaking, before he was speaking, whoever sees this thing about Israel become a nation is the generation. Now he says, whoever sees these signs in the heavens is the generation. So the question is how long ago is it? Well, first off, let me mention to you, did you know the Reformation was 500 years ago? Okay, that's 1517, 1917. I think the number 500 is a big marker. This is the anniversary of the Reformation. But listen to this. Matthew 24:37 says, as the days of Noah, so will it be in the coming of the Son of Man. Okay, so that means we have to go look as it was in the days of Noah, right? To know what time it is. Well, listen to Genesis 6:3. The Lord said, my spirit will not always strive with man because he's flesh, and his days will be how many years? Anyone remember? 120 years. That meant from that point, it'd be 120 years until the flood came. That's what that is saying. All right? Well, guess what? 120 years ago, he said that's in the days of Noah, it'll be 120 years. Did you know exactly 120 years ago was the first Zionist Congress held by Theodore Herzl, talking about there needed to be a homeland for the Jewish people? Do you know when that happened? Do you know when August 29th of 1897 was? The first of Elul. Exactly 120 years ago, the time of this eclipse is exactly 120 years ago from the first Zionist Congress. How long is a generation? Is it 120? Well, 1917 fulfills the 120. Okay, how about 100? Okay? Let's take a look at that. Did you know 100 years ago was dated November 2nd of 1917, the Balfour Declaration, declaring that Israel needs to be a nation. First Zionist Congress, the Jews are saying it. Now, the Balfour Declaration 100 years ago. Well, do you know what the biblical calendar date was, November 2nd, 1917? It was the same day as Noah's flood. So again, we're making a connection back to Noah's flood from 120 generation, from 100 generation. Okay, so now, how many of you know the number 70 is very important? 70 is highly important. Matter of fact, listen to this is from Jewish sources. Listen to what they say. The number 70 is critical in the turning points of history. They understand history. They understand timing. They said after the flood, 70 nations descended from Noah. 70 languages emerged at the building of the Tower of Babel. The Jewish nation began with 70 people who came with Jacob into Egypt. And in the world to come, there will be 70 nations who will recognize God as the one and only ruler of the world. 70 is very significant. As a matter of fact, in Psalms 20, there are 70 Hebrew words corresponding. This is what they say. This is what the Jews say. Listen to this very closely. They read Psalms 20 every day during the month of Elul because there are 70 Hebrew words corresponding to the 70 years of birth pains, which refer to the birth pains of the Messiah. And so they say that this is the pains that the Jewish people have to receive before the Messiah comes and redeems us. Well, what happened 70 years ago? Israel became a nation in 1948, 70 years ago. Matter of fact, UN 181 is dated, you can see at the bottom, November 29th of 1947. So 2017 is when they came out and said it. 1948 is when everyone voted. And then what do we have? How about 50 years? 50 years ago is the Jubilee year for Jerusalem. How long is a generation? It doesn't matter. They all fulfilled in 2017, the 50, the 70, the 100, the 120. Everything. I mean, you have the First Zionist Congress 120 years ago, Jerusalem reunified 50 years ago, the Balfour Declaration 100 years ago, the UN partition plan. That sounds like Las Vegas. All the cherries are coming at once. I mean, this is incredible. What are the chances? What are the odds? Okay? And here's why they read Psalm 21. It says, may the Lord answer you in the day of trouble. The day of trouble refers to Jacob's trouble. Okay, I talked to someone earlier, one of your guys, and it looks like I'm going to need a power cord here shortly. So if you have a Mac power cord. Okay, so now let's go back to how and when are eclipses to be understood as signs from God. Not every eclipse is a sign from God. I'll be the first one to tell you that, because a lot of times nobody even sees them. They're over the ocean or wherever, whenever. The way you know when an eclipse is a sign from God, okay, first off, God created his calendar for that. You can only have a solar eclipse on a new moon. That's it. And so that's why he said, I want your calendar to be based on the new moon. So when I send on the new moon a solar eclipse, you'll know I'm speaking to you. You can only have a lunar eclipse on a full moon, which is why Passover and Tabernacles are at a full moon. And so that's why it's so important that we have these 4 blood moons. But here, what are the mathematical odds that you can even have an eclipse? First off, here the moon is passing between the earth and the sun, but it's not exactly horizontal. It's even cockeyed. So to have this happen is pretty crazy, the mathematical odds. Now, when you look at the moon too, I don't know how many of you know science, but the moon, its orbit is elliptical. Sometimes it's far away when it's a full moon. Sometimes it's real close when it's a full moon. That's why when it's far away, it looks smaller. When it's at the closest point when there's a full moon, it is big. All right? Now, for example, here's the sun. I have that perigee is when it's at its closest. Apogee is when it's at the furthest. So if you have a solar eclipse, it's going to depend how far away the moon is. If it's like that, you know it's at apogee. It was far away. But if it's perigee, it's going to block out the whole sun. Right? So that's why solar eclipses are really rare, especially when they're going to be over land and if it's at perigee, not just apogee. So, but how many of you know the size of the Earth? The Earth is pretty big. Okay, if you compare it to some of these other planets, how many of you think the Earth's pretty big? How many of you have been to Israel? It's a long ways to get there. Okay, but look at the size of the Earth compared to the other planets. The Earth is tiny. How about compared to the sun itself? There's the Earth. Clear down there. Do you see that? Do you see the Earth? Right here's Earth. Let me give it to you this way. There's the Earth. Right there. Let's make it a little bit bigger so you can see. Okay, there's the Earth. Okay, now put the moon between the Earth and the sun. How small is the moon going to be? How in the world, why in the world does the moon and the sun appear the same size? Is the reason why. I'm going to tell you. How many of you know God's a mathematician? Scientist. Did you know the sun and the moon appear to be the same size in the Earth because the sun's diameter is 400 times greater and the sun is 400 times further away. So you have the Earth to the moon. Well, guess what? The sun is 400 times bigger, as you just saw in that picture, but it's also 400 times further away, so therefore they appear to be the same size. Let me just look at something. And the distance to the moon is 10 times the circumference of the Earth. It's about 40,000 kilometers, so it's 400,000 kilometers. So here we see that it's 400,000 kilometers away. It's 400 times larger than the moon. The sun is 400 times further from the Earth. And we know the sun and the moon were created on the fourth day. And the sun and the moon are signs. Well, guess what? The letter Tav in Hebrew means a sign or a mark. And just like Roman numerals, it has a numerical value of 400. So the sun and the moon are signs. And the Hebrew word for sign is 400. And here we have all these 400s. Do you see how I created it this way? Now let me explain one thing. In Hebrew, every letter is also a word. Every letter is a number. And modern Hebrew doesn't look like the Hebrew that David wrote or that Moses used. Okay, in the ancient Tav, it looked like that. It was more like an X. Because it means sign, Tav means sign. And so when you were to sign a contract, you didn't know how to write, you made an X. That's the X. That is God's signature. The letter Tav is God's signature. Thanks. And so what happens, that's the wrong one. It won't work for this model. Okay, we're going to have to hurry then. I left mine at the hotel. Okay, so to me, I just wanted you to know that the Tav is an X. In Ezekiel 9:6, God puts a mark on the head of all the Jews that are praying in Jerusalem, weeping. It was a cross that he put on the foreheads of all the Jews. It's the letter Tav. Okay, so let's move on. I want to tell you a little bit about Jonah. Jonah lived about the same time as Ashur-dan was in Nineveh. How many of you know the story of Jonah and Nineveh? Well, did you know there was a solar eclipse in 763 BC, right before judgment came on Nineveh? That's in NASA. As a matter of fact, here's Nineveh over in Iraq. You're going to see Mosul. Many of you have heard of Mosul, where our military is. Well, that's ancient Nineveh. You see Mosul there, and then you can see the Nineveh ruins right above it to the left. So here's Nineveh, all right? And in case you didn't know, guess what happened? This is from ancient cuneiform tablets they found. Most people don't know the backstory. How many of you know if God's going to bring revival, he has to break up the fallow ground first? That's what it says, till he comes and rains righteousness on you. Jonah is running in fear, not knowing God had been preparing the ground for him to go to Nineveh. Because what happened, 3 years before Jonah came, there was a plague that plagued all of Nineveh. The very next year, there was a civil war. People were blaming each other for bringing the plague, a major civil war. The next year, there was another plague. And that was followed by a total solar eclipse. And then 1 month later, on the first of Elul, here comes Jonah. Repent. Guess what? They had the plague. They had the civil war. They had a plague. They got a solar eclipse. So now you understand. The June 15th eclipse over Nineveh went right over there. This is from NASA's website. This is dating it. That tells you there was a total solar eclipse over Nineveh. Mosul is right there. All right, now that's very important to understand. So, if you remember, it was on the first of Elul too, to repent. That's when Jonah came. So by now, they know the wrath of God is coming. But I want to show you another historical pattern. Look at 1914. This is when World War I, what was starting right before. Let me make sure that's the right one. That looks like the right one. Yay! Okay. It's a sign. Okay. Get a load of this. It is said that World War I lasted about 4 years. World War I from August 1st, which was the 9th of Av, okay, until November 11th, 1918. Well, here, I don't know if you knew this, but on August 21st of 1914, at the very time, at the beginning of World War I, there was a total solar eclipse over Eastern Europe, the Ottoman Empire, and Nineveh. Okay? Now, here's what's fascinating. See, because the world goes by the sun, that's why the Jews say a solar eclipse means judgment coming on nations. The Jews go by the moon for their monthly calendar, so a lunar eclipse means judgment potentially coming on Israel. And so here, what do we see? A solar eclipse at the beginning of World War I through Eastern Europe and the Ottoman Empire. What happens? You have World War I, the Ottoman Empire is destroyed. So you see how important eclipses are to historical events. Now this eclipse in beginning World War I was on August 21st, 1914. Guess when that was? The first of Elul. Are we seeing a connection here yet? So here on August 21st of 1914 was this eclipse. Well, what are we having this year? August 21st, 2017, this eclipse cutting across the United States. Now, what's fascinating is this eclipse that's coming this August 21st. Remember in 1917, we joined the war of World War I, and guess what? We had a total solar eclipse, almost the same identical pattern going over the United States on June 8th of 1918, right at World War I. And the day before, history says that was the Battle of Belleau Wood, involving the U.S. 2nd Infantry Division. During the 3-week fighting against the Germans, Americans experienced their first significant battlefield casualties with 5,000 killed. So here we have this eclipse across the United States, World War I, our worst casualties. Now, on August 21st, again, is the first of Elul. Now, let's take a look at something here. Here we have this solar eclipse coming on August 21st, which is called the most famous solar eclipse in history. And I want you to notice something here. It says during this so-called Great American Total Solar Eclipse, it's a 70-mile wide path. Remember number 70, guys? Hello, the sun. Isn't that interesting that it's a 70-mile wide path? Okay. And it says this eclipse is particularly rare because of its accessibility. The path of most total eclipses fall over water or unpopulated regions. The August event is going to go down as the first total solar eclipse whose path of totality stays completely in the United States since when? 1776. Okay, are things starting to come together timing-wise? Here's the path of totality, 70 miles wide. Now, I have the path stopping right here at St. Louis, and do you know why? 7 years later, number 7 sound interesting? Book of Revelation. Did you know 7 years later there's another total solar eclipse on April 8th of 2024 that is crossing the other direction? 7 years later, guess when that one falls? On Nisan 1, the beginning of the religious calendar. God is using these eclipses again, tied. Here you have these two eclipses. That sure looks like the letter Tav, a sign from God. The X. The ancient Hebrew letter Tav was an X, a sign from God that this is coming. St. Louis I find that interesting. It's the gateway city. It's the heart of America. And as a matter of fact, here is the path of this one that's coming this year. Notice it goes right through southern Illinois. Did you know Southern Illinois is known as Little Egypt? It is known as Little Egypt. As a matter of fact, the southernmost city is called Cairo. That's where this is coming through. Now, how did it get its name? I don't know if you knew this. Here, let me check something here. Oop, let me go back one. Oh, I'm going the wrong direction. Let me go back here. Okay. It became known as Little Egypt. And the reason why, let me go to my notes here. In 1858, debating in northern Illinois, Stephen Douglas had threatened Lincoln by asserting that he would trot him down to Egypt and there challenge him to repeat his anti-slavery views. The northern Illinois was against slavery. Southern Illinois, known as Little Egypt, was pro-slavery. That's another reason why it was known as Little Egypt. And in 1871, Judge Andrew Duff wrote an article in which he claimed the name of Egypt related to Southern Illinois' role in supplying grain to Northern Illinois following the winter of the deep snow. And so they needed grain, so they would go down to Southern Illinois, and so needing grain, it was called Egypt. All right, but anyway, I think it's fascinating that that's also where this eclipse takes place. But the other thing, do you know where this eclipse takes place in the sky? This August 21st total solar eclipse. Anyone likes astronomy? Do you know where it's occurring? It's occurring in Leo, the lion of the tribe of Judah, over the top of Regulus, the brightest star representing the king. And Regulus comes from the Hebrew word regel, which means to walk or to stomp on or to tread underfoot, which is what you're going to be doing very soon, is treading the enemy underfoot. Okay, so now I'm almost done. And then what do we have? You're familiar, as Pastor Kilpatrick's been talking about, the Revelation 12 sign. Now, here's just a picture of the woman clothed with the sun. You can see the moon under her feet. And then the 9 stars that make up that constellation. But we know what's happening is you're getting these 3 planets that are coming into Leo. You're also getting the new moon there. It's actually at a new moon under her feet. Jupiter is right there. And as you know in Revelation 12, 1 and 2, it says there was a great sign was seen in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, had on her head a crown of 12 stars. Okay, she was with child. She was about to give birth, right? And she's in pain to give birth. Well, the woman clothed with the sun represents Virgo. Okay. It represents Israel as Virgo. The 12 stars represent the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, here's what's interesting. I believe these signs mean we're to look up because the redemption's drawing nigh. Here we have the 70th anniversary of her birth as a nation. And look at Leviticus. I want to compare something. I don't know if you knew this, but in Revelation, how many of you want to understand the book of Revelation? Did you know there are over 600 references to the Old Testament just in the book of Revelation? So if you don't know the connections, you're going to have a hard time understanding the book of Revelation. So here we read in John about a woman giving birth to a man-child, right? Where do you find that in the Bible, in the Torah? Does anyone know where you read about a man-child being born in the Torah? It has to be connected. Well, it's like Revelation 12. It connects to Leviticus 12. Leviticus 12 is what it talks about a woman, if she gives birth to a boy or a man-child, then she has 40 days process before she can present him to the temple. If it's a girl, it's 80-day process. And in Leviticus 12, it says this: if a woman bears a man-child, she's unclean for 7 days, and then he's circumcised on the 8th day. But after the 7 days, it says she has to continue in her purification for 33 days, and then she can come and present the baby in the temple or the tabernacle. So remember Simeon and Anna, when they came to the temple, they were looking for the Messiah. They came on the 40th day. Okay? She was unclean 7 days. She couldn't go anywhere near the temple. 8th day he was circumcised, but she had to wait 33 more days, and then she goes into the temple and presents this beautiful baby. So here's Simeon and Anna at the temple seeing Yeshua. Okay, so now, what do we have? September 23rd of this year September 21st and 22nd is Rosh Hashanah. It's a 2-day festival. And then on the 23rd, which happens to be a Sabbath here, and it's Ha'azinu. And do you know what Ha'azinu is in the Torah portion? That's Deuteronomy, the Song of Moses. What do they sing in Revelation? The Song of Moses. And the Torah portion that weekend is the Song of Moses, is what's being read. Interesting little tidbit, but that's when you have the sign in the heavens. Now remember, if she gives birth to the man-child, she's unclean how many days? 7 days. Guess what 7 days later is? Yom Kippur. Okay, so there's Yom Kippur. And so then what happens? Now she has to wait 33 more days to present the baby. What happens 33 days later this year? It takes you to the Balfour Declaration, November 2nd, when they're presenting Israel should become a nation in 1917. So here, at the very same time, the Balfour Declaration. We're going to close with this thought now. How many of you have heard of the International Day of Peace? Okay, every year the UN has the International Day of Peace. It used to be, I believe, on the second Tuesday of every September. But guess what happened? They were going to hold it the second Tuesday, 9/11 of 2001. And so guess what? It got canceled. And they held it on September 21st in 2001. And so every year since then, they decided they didn't want to hold it on 9/11 in case it ever came around again as the second Tuesday. So they decided to have it always on September 21st. The General Assembly declared from 2002 on, it has to be September 21st. Okay, so this tells you about that. Well, guess what? Here we have, every year on September 21st. But this year, for the very first time in 16 years, it falls on Rosh Hashanah. The International Peace Day falls on Rosh Hashanah. Now, every year they pick a theme. In 2014, the International Day of Peace was the right of peoples to peace. In 2015, partnerships for peace. 2016, building blocks for peace. This year, for the first time in history, it falls on Rosh Hashanah. And the theme for 2017 is peace and safety. Together for peace, respect, safety, and dignity for all. Anyone find that fascinating? And listen to 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 through 4. Concerning the times and the seasons, what you're talking about, the biblical calendar, it says, you know perfectly well the Lord comes as a thief in the night. And when they're saying peace and safety, sudden destruction comes like birth pains. And the Revelation 12 sign is the next day. And so here we have Daniel had how many weeks? 70 weeks. And there's one 7-day time period left, or 7-year time period left. The Hebrew of the year this year is 777. In other words, this week is over. We're going to start a new final week. Very fascinating. This is one Rosh Hashanah I would not miss. And but anyway, we have a shofar wave around the world. I have a book that's out there in a DVD talking about a believer's guide to divine appointments. I don't have the calendars with me. You can get them online. But it's a commemorative calendar of the 70th anniversary. It goes all the way through 2018. But let's close with prayer. How many believe we need to pray? But it's just so important we get on God's calendar so we understand the timing of biblical events and how they relate. Otherwise, see, this calendar I have that you can order interlays our calendar with the biblical calendar. So you can look and see what day it is on the biblical calendar. And we also in the back have all these different events. But I want to close with the priestly blessing. How many of you are familiar with that? Okay, the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you, be gracious to you. I haven't had a chance to teach on that, but I'm going to give you the 1-minute summary. The interesting thing about this prayer, where you don't see this in English, you only see it in Hebrew, where it says the Lord bless you, It's in the singular, not the plural. Even though there's thousands of people, the Lord wants to bless you as an individual. It's not a corporate blessing, it's an individual blessing. Now, the Hebrew word for bless is barak, okay? That same word that's translated to bless in Psalms is translated to kneel. And when we bless the Lord, it's like we come on bended knee. A blessing is a baraka, and that means to come on bended knee bringing a gift. Think of the Magi, baby Jesus, they come on bended knee bringing a gift. That's being a blessing, okay? But here, everyone has to stand when the priestly blessing is said. Everyone has to stand. And the priests, what they do when they do this, the old Spock thing, he was Jewish, in case you didn't know. But what this looks like a W. Do you see the W that's formed? What in the ancient Hebrew picture language that Moses used, that was the letter Shin, which is the SH sound for Shaddai. The blessing ends, he will put his name upon you. So they form the letter Shin, which means Shaddai putting his name upon you. Okay? Now, but here's what's crazy. Everyone has to stand and realize it's an individual blessing. And the word bless or blessing means what? To come on bended knee bringing a gift. While you're standing there, what the creator of the universe says, it's the Lord bless you. He wants to come to you on bended knee and give you a gift while you're standing there. Think of what he did when he saved you. He came on bended knee carrying the cross to bring you the greatest gift that he could have given you. And then it says protect you. May the Lord bless you and keep you. The Hebrew word for keep means to protect. The ancient shepherds would put thorns as a corral around the shepherds at night to protect them. So what God is saying, not only does he want to come to you on bended knee and give you a gift, he wants to protect you from every predator in your life. That is incredible. And then may he make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The word shine means to look at you eyeball to eyeball. He wants to look at you eyeball to eyeball. And then to be gracious means even if you've been bad, it literally from the Hebrew mind means even if you've been bad, he will get personally involved in your life. So this blessing is even for you if you feel like you don't deserve it. And then lastly, may he lift his countenance upon you and give you peace. How does God lift his countenance upon you? He's up there, you're down here. It's because he's picking you up like a little kid and looking at you and then give you peace. It's that peace that only he can give. So you will have no fear. So let's stand and let the Lord come to you on bended knee and give you a gift and protect you from all predators in your life. I will say it in Hebrew and then translate it into English. Ivarekaka Adonai ve'ish mareka. Ya'er Adonai panavilecha v'chuneka. Yisa Adonai panavilecha v'yasem laka shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you his peace, his shalom, in that wonderful name. Eyeh Asher Eyeh. Amen. Thank you very much. Hey.
Just hold tight.